I was meeting a friend for lunch the other day, and I stumbled across a new thrift shop that I didn't even know about. So of course I had to go in, and I found this thing on the shelf. It's a Viewsonic NextVision N6 high-definition video processor, whatever that is. The box was enough to catch my eye, but I had no idea what the device was actually for. Turns out it might just be the perfect thing for retro gaming on a CRT monitor. So let's check it out right now, here on Retro Bits. Taking a look at the box, the first thing of interest is the price. I paid $8.99 for this, but the sticker has a date of February 17th, 2025 on it, so this thing could have been sitting on the shelf for almost an entire year. Now, the box has a bit of water damage here, so hopefully the device inside is still fine, but we'll find out in a little bit. In terms of what this is, it says it turns your computer display into an HD TV monitor, gaming center, and personal theater, and that it scales up to 1280 by 1024 progressive video resolution. Here on the back, it mentions support for a variety of output resolutions from 640 by 480 all the way up to 1280 by 1024. It also talks about a variety of TV features, including parental control, closed captions, and picture-in-picture. Here, it mentions having video freeze and zoom capability. Now that's interesting because all of the inputs and outputs of this device are purely analog. There's nothing digital about it. But to have freeze and zoom capability, it must have some kind of digital frame buffer on board. So I'm wondering how that will affect latency for retro gaming. We're going to have to test that later. It says here that it has reverse 3.2 pull-down technology, so that must be for DVD movies that had a 24 FPS source converted to NTSC's 29.97. This will reconstruct the frames and smooth out the judder. It also mentions a 3D comb filter here for composite video, which will help reduce dot crawl and color bleeding. So it looks like we have component, composite, RF, S-video, and RGB input, and a single RGB output. So if it's not clear what this is yet, basically it's a video upscaler that you use with a VGA monitor. So what purpose could this thing possibly have here in 2026? Well, CRTs have been making a big comeback in recent years, largely thanks to retro gaming and vintage computer enthusiasts. Of course, they take up a lot of space, so you may only have room for one. And if you're only going to have one CRT, you might consider making it a VGA monitor instead of a television. Compared to a standard definition set, computer monitors have a higher resolution tube, no 15 kHz whine, and can really show off those delicious, well-defined scanlines that everybody loves. I've already got this GBS control that I built a few years ago. It can upscale RGB and component to VGA, but it has no RF, composite, or S-video inputs. Some of the more modern off-the-shelf versions do support those last two options though. The open source scan converter, or OSSC, is another popular upscaler on the market, but it doesn't support RF, composite, or S-video without additional hardware and can only output HDMI. RetroTink is a well-known brand that makes a variety of high-end upscalers. But like the OSSC, their lineup of products, including the 4K, 5X, and 2X models, only output HDMI. So, not a lot of options in the current market for using classic hardware with a VGA CRT, especially for those systems that only have RF. Personally, I have no interest whatsoever in using an HDMI display or having pixel-perfect, emulator-like upscaling for my retro games, so this Viewsonic NextVision might be the ideal solution. I guess we'll find out. As best as I can tell, the NextVision was launched in early 2003. A lot of users would have already made the move to LCD panels with DVI by that time, so the N6 was pretty late to the party. Sales may not have been that strong because these things seem pretty rare. I couldn't find a single one for sale on eBay when I looked. There was very little coverage of the N6 in old computer magazines either. The only advertising I could find was this mention of the N5, a lower range product offering a reduced feature set and resolution. The original MSRP of the N6 was $399, as listed on Viewsonic's own website from 2003. That's roughly $700 in today's currency, not exactly budget-oriented. Well, I suppose we should have a look and put it through its paces to see if that price was justified or not. Here inside the box, it looks like everything is still in its original factory packaging, and I don't see any signs of water damage, so that's awesome. Here we've got the device itself, still in its original packaging with desiccant pouch. Nice. Looks like they've included a bundle of cables here. We have what looks to be like a VGA pass-through cable, power cable, composite cable here, and an audio cable. Remote control. We saw that there's an RF input, so there must be a TV tuner on here. So this is how we change the channels and probably perform other setup functions. This looks like a stand. We saw on the box that the device can be either horizontal or vertical, and this is probably the stand for positioning it vertically. And here we've got probably a power brick. And then in the back of the box, we have the manual and also a quick setup guide. Here in the quick setup guide, we can see what a typical configuration might look like. We've got our main PC hooked up to the RGB in and our main PC monitor hooked up to the RGB out, and then everything else connected to this device. So the intention here was to use your main PC's monitor as your only display, and to it you could hook up a DVD, VCR, LD player, a camera, video game system, an antenna or cable TV, or any device that provides a high definition component output here. And then all of that gets funneled into your main PC monitor here. So here on the front of the device, we have a power button, an input select button, volumes down and up, channel down and up, and a headphone jack. And then here around the back, we have the inputs that we've already looked at. What's interesting is that we have computer input and computer output, and then an audio input for your computer and an audio output. RF carries its own audio, but composite, S-video, and component video all have to share a single left-right RCA input. So there's not enough audio inputs for all the devices you may hook up to this thing, so that could be a problem. Maybe you're not supposed to use all those devices at once. One other interesting thing here is that we have RGB input, but it doesn't explicitly say VGA input. I wonder if this input will upscale 15 kilohertz RGB and put it out on the VGA port, or if it's just a straight pass-through. We're going to have to test that. Right, so here's the first setup we'll be testing with, starting with RF and working up from there. The Sony will be our baseline for comparison, and the NEC is attached to the upscaler's VGA output. We'll be using a ColecoVision, which only has RF, so I'll connect it to the tuner input on the upscaler. Huh, this thing is pretty unbalanced with the vertical stand once you start plugging stuff in. Maybe QA was out sick the day they designed this. I selected these two displays because they have the same screen size and a similar dot pitch. The main difference is that the NEC uses a shadow mask while the Sony has an aperture grille. I wonder if the original battery still works after sitting unused for 23 years. Haha, it totally does. That's crazy. Right, so here's the on-screen display, and it looks like we have pretty standard controls for adjusting the picture. I'll leave these alone for now, but we may come back to them later. Under the video settings, it looks like the default is 640 by 480. I'm not sure there's any reason to use a higher resolution with a 240p or 480i source and a CRT, but you definitely want these options to match the native resolution of an LCD screen or when viewing a 720p or 1080i source. Here are a few other options like sleep timer, closed caption source, picture-in-picture, and what looks like the comb filter. In the TV settings, we can select a tuner type, scan for channels, and even add custom labels to channels. Neat! Sound settings are pretty standard. Looks like it supports secondary audio program, or would have once upon a time anyway. Parental controls, also no longer relevant. And last but not least, we have a screen showing information about our input source, some geometry settings, and language choice. One last thing before we test the Coleco. The remote has a button labeled Pop, and it brings up this 9-channel matrix. You can only watch one channel at a time, but you can move between active windows and refresh all 9 by using the directional buttons. Because there are no analog broadcasts anymore, this feature is useless. But to be fair, it probably always was. I'm sure by now you just want to see how the upscaled RF looks. Well, bad news, it looks like this. I tried 4 different RF sources: the ColecoVision, an Atari 2600, a Famicom, and a VCR. I tried channels 3, 4, 96, different cables, and every available setting on the upscaler, and it simply can't tune to any of them. The static changes slightly when I power it on, but there's nothing even remotely recognizable as a picture. We may be dealing with bad capacitors in the scaler, so I'll have to open it up and check things out. Darn. Uh-oh, I voided the warranty. Well, at first glance, there's no sign of bulging or leaking capacitors, so that's good. This thing is pretty complex in here, though. The big VLSI chip is covered in a heatsink, so no idea if we're dealing with an off-the-shelf upscaler or something proprietary to Viewsonic. These ESMT chips are SD-RAM, 2 megabytes each, and there are 4 of them. I'm guessing we found our frame buffer. Napkin Math says a single frame of 1280 by 1024 at 24-bit color eats up 3.8 megabytes, so there's enough memory here for a double buffer if I had to guess. The Analog Devices chip here is for capturing RGB input from the attached PC. The datasheet claims 300 MHz bandwidth and support for resolutions up to 1280 by 1024 at 75 Hz. So between this chip and the SD-RAM, it probably explains the price difference between the N6 and lower spec models. The RF tuner is probably just an off-the-shelf part. The AMIC chip is a 256 kilobyte flash memory, probably for storing settings, channel data, etc. No idea what this is. Could be a ROM or a programmable logic device of some kind, since the firmware has to live somewhere on this thing. I'm also not sure what this little Sony PCB is for, but it has what appear to be a number of small adjustable pots. I'm not going to mess with them right now until I finished all the other testing we need to do. No smoking gun as to why the RF isn't working, and the internals are nifty and all, but can we please get on with the testing, Matt? Yes, we can, voice inside my head, so here's the setup. Pretty much the same as before, but now with a Super Nintendo. For this test, I'll connect the composite video from the console to both the PVM and the upscaler. First, let's check the raw composite output on the Sony. And now, the upscaler's VGA output. Ignore the differences in color and brightness. The 2 monitors are calibrated differently. The upscaled image looks pretty decent, but it is noticeably softer. Look at the mountains and the castle. The camera also captures a lot more moire when filming the Sony, but not the NEC. Anyway, at least composite works, so that's a win. If we disregard the moire, composite on the PVM is definitely a lot crisper, especially in person. We also see some scanlines, but there is a lot of fringing around the edges. Check out the text and the health bar. In comparison, the upscaler is smoothing everything out, so we don't see any of those annoying dots. It's a bit of a trade-off, really. You know what? This simply isn't an apples-to-apples comparison. The displays are just too different. So instead, let's try using a single screen. This Dell LCD has both VGA and composite inputs, with the latter being notoriously crunchy. I'm curious if the upscaled VGA is better than the monitor's native composite handling or not. Well, honestly, I'm not in love with either of these. The aspect ratio is more correct using the upscaled output over VGA though. Some of the lower screen gets cut off using the Dell's native composite input. Next up is S-Video. I don't think there's any point in doing another A-B comparison with two different CRTs, so let's just focus on the output of the upscaler for now. I mean the high-definition video processor. I gotta say, the Commodore 64 looks pretty great on a VGA monitor with the upscaled S-Video. We're looking at 640 by 480 right now, but let's see if there's any difference with the higher resolutions. 800 by 600 looks about the same, but the geometry needs adjusting. Sorry about the raster bars, each resolution has a slightly different refresh rate. Now 1024 by 768. Not a big difference. This is a completely original system, so the jail bars are just part of the authentic experience. Finally, max resolution, 1280 by 1024. Notice there are no scanlines with this 240p source, as the scaler is filling every line. That's a bit of a bummer. The GEOS desktop should make for a pretty good test due to its high resolution and checkerboard background pattern. Yeah, I think this looks pretty awesome in VGA. It feels like a more modern machine. The desktop is noticeably sharper as we move up to higher resolutions as well. Here, let's drop back to 640 by 480 again to see the difference. One more thing I want to try. Here's a direct video capture of the scaler's output. Pay close attention to the border and text at the top of the screen as I increase and decrease the sharpness setting. Sharpness boosts the high frequency portion of the signal to enhance the detail that gets lost during the amplification stage. Too high and you get artifacting. Too low and the image is soft and loses detail. While I've got the Commodore out, I want to see if the scaler introduces any latency. We already know it's got a digital frame buffer, so I've got to assume it must add at least some. The 1084 on the left will be directly connected to the 64, and the Gateway 2000 on the right will be connected to the scaler's output. One, two, three. Sonic on the left has moved 3 frames, while Sonic on the right doesn't leave the ground until the 4th frame. At 60 FPS, 3 frames is 50 milliseconds. Many of the modern scalers mentioned earlier have between 0 to 4 milliseconds of latency, so 50 is practically an eternity. Now, there are more accurate ways to measure this, but you get the idea. Next up, the OG Xbox. This is a good test case because the console has 720p and 1080i component output, but no native VGA support like the Dreamcast, for instance. Okay, once again, the output is on the softer side, but I think it looks pretty great on this little 14-inch monitor. The scaler seems to have no issue with any of the resolutions the Xbox can throw at it, from 480p up to 1080i. I am curious how my $30 DIY GBS control scaler compares to the Viewsonic N6, so let's do a quick comparison. I had to stare at some screenshots for a while just to see much of a difference. The Viewsonic is cutting off some of the overscan area, resulting in a slightly zoomed in picture, but otherwise, from an image quality perspective, there's really not much in it. Earlier, I wondered if this thing could upscale 15 kHz RGB, or if it was just passing the signal through. There's only one way to find out, so I've got my Amiga 1200 connected directly to the scaler's RGB in. And the verdict? Well, that's a shame. Alright, so how about PAL support? I've got my Evo 64 here with the VIC-2 Kawari set to PAL mode. How many different systems have I set up now? Anyway, place your bets. Yeah, no big surprise. It can't decode the color signal, nor does it seem to handle 50 Hz gracefully. Given that we saw this on the PCB earlier, I wasn't expecting it to work, but you've got to try, right? For completeness' sake, we should probably try the features like picture-in-picture, freeze, and zoom. For PIP, an RGB source is required, so I hauled down the Gateway 2000 from the shelf and I'm pretty sure I destroyed my neck in the process. These are the lengths I go through for you guys, so how about a thumbs up or something? Haha, okay, picture-in-picture. I'm pressing the button, but nothing's happening. According to the manual, it works when in RGB mode, which we are in, and with any of these resolutions and refresh rates, all of which I tried. No dice. Zoom and freeze both seem to work fine. You can scroll around while zoomed in, either live or when in freeze mode. Yeah, I'm not sure how useful these features are exactly, but they do work. Back to Super Nintendo Chalmers for one last thing. The benefit of using a 240p console with a VGA CRT are the well-defined scanlines offered by the high-resolution display. As we saw earlier, the upscaler interpolates the composite source and fully fills in every line. There's no option to change this behavior. The NEC Multisync 3D can ingest 240p RGB natively, and here's what that looks like when connected directly to the screen. Of course, it does come down to personal preference, but come on. It's a shame the N6 doesn't have a menu option to enable scanline insertion because the NEC's native input is just mwah. I had high hopes for this device given the original price tag and the list of features, but as we saw, it turned out to be a pretty average consumer-grade product. It works alright, albeit with a few glaring issues, namely the broken RF tuning, broken picture-in-picture, high latency, and lack of 15 kHz RGB support. There were certainly better ways to spend the equivalent of $700 in order to watch your DVDs back in 2003, and the latency is just too high for serious gaming, whether it was back then or now in 2026. Also, did I mention you don't get any scanlines? If you had one of these back in the day, let us know what you used it for and how well it worked for you. Anyway, that's a wrap on the Viewsonic NextVision N6. I hope you enjoyed this bit. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Retro Bits. Oh God, is it over? This was only supposed to be 5 minutes. How hard is it to keep it short, Matt? Ow, my neck.